And we will ask Torbjörn and Vladimir to come up and join us. And we have a bit more than 30 minutes for questions. And I know there will be many questions, and I think we will take 2 or 3 at a time. So that's why I put some paper and pen here. You can write. So please be short and efficient, and you will have maybe short answers, I don't know, but I would like so many as possible to. Let's start here, and you can hold up your hand so we can have a bit flow with this. You can tell us who you are. So, yeah.
In short, thank you for this event. Definitely thank you for professional analysis. And all speakers agree that it depends not just only on what Russia is doing, but what we will be doing. So my question would be to Mr. Becker, but others also can join. Now, the 15th package of sanctions in the European Union being prepared, and what would be your recommendation as a priority? What should be or must be included into that 15th package?
We have more questions here, Erik. Okay, if I do have two mics, that's great. And after Erik, someone here, raise their hands, you can be...
So thank you very much for a good presentation, and especially to Torbjörn for the good report. Just wondering about the Global South initiative, because of course they are a small economy, they are lonely in the sense that the Western economies are substantially larger, but of course they're also strategically trying to build up this Global South, the BRICS kind of initiative. And any thoughts about that? Because that could be a little bit of a counteraction that will build their strength more long term as well. If you include a larger economy there, like Brazil, India, China, South Africa, then you potentially have something that could challenge the kind of dollar Western hemisphere. Thanks.
Third there, and then we let you in, and we have more questions after that.
Thank you, Elina Schleyer, the Chief Economist at SIDA. Very much enjoyed the discussion and a sobering analysis of the economic situation at the macro level. I was wondering if you have any insights on how to interpret the micro implications of this. I took note of the World Bank now classifying Russia as a high-income country. The official poverty figures are very low. What are the pieces that we need to pick up at the end of this adventure? How does it look like? Thank you.
I will let all of you answer, and you can choose if you want to answer all the questions, but please be quite short too. You can start, Vladimir.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So I will start with the last one about poverty and all these indicators. This is really distorted because there's been a significant surge in average salaries because of all this boost of money into military economy and so on. And they're not properly adjusted to real inflation, because what the World Bank uses is the official inflation data. We're not only talking about the current year's year-on-year inflation. We're talking about accumulated inflation since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And if we go further, the gap widens, obviously. So all these assessments, both as per official Russian statistics or as per the World Bank that the poverty is reducing, this is basically a reflection of analysts not catching up with the gap. Salaries is growing, true. Are they catching up with real inflation? So one of the graphs which I recently did for some of my video commentaries is I took this 22% ROMIR, actual fast-moving consumer goods inflation, and compared it to salaries growth in most industries and sectors, including the military production. Most of them were below that. If you take 8-9% official inflation rate, obviously salaries indexation is higher. That means poverty is diminishing on paper mostly. So we really got to be careful with that. And before we actually address that gap between actual inflation and real, like the temperature, if you look at the forecast, it's +5, but real feels 0, right? So sort of like that. We need to be very careful with poverty assessment and micro-level assessment before we get the real inflation numbers right. And just a couple of comments on these more general questions. BRICS. We can clearly see the difference with the relations with the West as we knew it for the past 40 years. I'm going to say something that Russian elite really doesn't like to hear. The West was a major donor in everything, capital, investment, technology, skill, whatever. China and BRICS countries are not interested at all in being our donor and in seeing Russia emerging as a competitor, particularly in manufactured products and so on. Moscow Mayor Sobyanin put it about a year ago in a charming way. He said, Eastern countries are waging an economic war against us, and they are much tougher than Western partners because they don't want to share technology. They don't want to supply missing components for production. They only want to sell finished products at a premium. So we do trade. In terms of trade, yes, they've been substituting a lot of products. But in terms of investment, in terms of technology sharing, in terms of skill, nothing. And if you really look at BRICS, this is more like a photo op gathering because you see a lot of different angles of hostility between China and India and some others. So BRICS really is not evolving as a European economic community did decades ago and so on. So there's more talk about it than real economic integration. Same as Russia, again, major BRICS economies are not interested in Russia emerging as a competitor.
Yeah, maybe I should start then with the 15 package. I would definitely argue that we need to strengthen sanctions on oil. So that today is a discussion about the shadow fleet. Our friends in the Kyiv School and in the Yermak-Makfal group has some specific proposals about insurance verification, which would limit the access of the shadow fleet to the Baltic Sea and some of our other coastal waters. I think that's really one way of doing this. If we do that, we can actually make sure that we can adhere to the at least $60 price cap. And we should be aware of the fact that if things go really bad in the Middle East, international prices will increase significantly, and if we don't do something about the shadow fleet, Russia will get revenues that actually increase on oil. So we really, really need to tighten sanctions on the shadow fleet. We should also think about LNG. In particular, we should make sure that we limit the resources they have to build up the capacity in the LNG sector. So we should not be exporting stuff that they can use to increase their LNG capacity. Then I think we have to do a lot of the diplomatic stuff also connected to the BRICS countries and the Global South. We have to make sure they understand that we're 25 times the size of Russia. And at some stage, we need to put pressure on them and say, guys, you need to choose, do you want to be a partner of Russia or do you want to be a partner of us? And we should remember we can use both sticks and carrots and some good combination.
A lot of diplomatic stuff.
Yes.
I will take that with me.
Yes. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Emil.
I think they answered. So, yeah.
So,
thank you, Minister and distinguished panelists. I'm Diana Janse, State Secretary at the MFA. So, Emil, you touched a bit on customers in Russia noticing, of course, that inflation looks different than the official figures. But it would be interesting to hear you comment on the general debate inside Russia on economic issues. Are people buying into this narrative, or is it a whispering, if not an open debate about how bad things actually are? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm the Danish ambassador. Thank you very much, Madam Minister Elisabeth, for arranging this meeting and inviting ambassadors as well. It's so important that we have correct information about Russia and Russian economy. And we've been hearing some examples of how there is a misunderstanding also in international media houses about the economy, and that people are perhaps unwillingly giving information that is actually Russian disinformation propaganda. So my question would be, rhetorically perhaps, are we good enough? Are we good enough in Europe at actually debunking the myths and the disinformation stemming from Russia? And if we are not, how should we address it? And how can we make sure that this information, the proper information, comes out to the public?
and the short answer is no, we're not, and we're doing this, and we'll try to get more people to talk. But they should also, you can also answer.
Exactly.
Thank you. We'll have one more question here. So, yeah.
Okay, me. Okay, my name is Ann-Marie Sätre. I'm a professor at Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies in Uppsala. I just came back from Kazakhstan, and I was wondering, because you mentioned also Kazakhstan and their role in all this. And for example, they had a referendum on that Russia is going to build a nuclear power station in Kazakhstan. And 6th of October, they had this referendum, and 75% supported this idea, according to official information, so to say. And so I'm just wondering, because how do you interpret this? My impression is that people in Kazakhstan are, well, they are watching TV. The Russian influence is very strong. You hear Russian all the time in the streets and so on. And so I'm wondering a little bit how you deal with that. I mean, it's similar in other countries in Central Asia and also, for example, in Armenia, as far as I understand it. So I wonder a little bit how you look at this.
We have one more question in this round.
Yeah, thank you.
It's Oscar där nere.
Thank you very much. Oskar Jonsson, Swedish Defence University. Thank you for a great presentation, all of you. Besides oil stemming the revenue to the Russian government, what's the most important things that we can do that helps to drive inflation? Because I see that as the kind of big X factor here in what you're saying regarding the Russian economy. Thank you.
Emil, you can start.
Yeah. So the question about the debate. Oh, yes, I can put this. So the debate in Russia, I think this is an interesting question I've been trying to look at because I would say from what I've seen, I've tried to look at what professional economists in Russia who still are loyal to the government, so to say, how they are thinking about their situation and the country's future. And I see one stream of thought is that Russia will somehow be able to get back to economic growth through investing in the defense industry. It will somehow create innovation and allow the rest of the economy to catch up. And also it hinges, of course, a lot on the partnership with China, that together Russia and China will be some kind of new pole in the world economy that can, independent of the West, can grow together. And so there is this stream of thought, and I think it's really the only, to me it seems like it's a way of coping with a very depressing reality, and the longer we go on, the more it becomes evident that this is not going to happen really. And Mr. Milov is spending doing efforts to debunk these hopes. There is also another faction, I would say, or stream of thought in Russia, which is, I think, you can kind of understand, but it's more hidden, and it's people driving, or they want to see even more spending on the military, and they want to see a full war economy that will allow Russia to win decisively. And there is a tradition in Russia and the Soviet Union. I think the historical experience that informs the war today is the Second World War. And there is this idea that the Soviet Union managed to defeat Nazi Germany because they managed to economically mobilize and produce more stuff, more tanks, rifles, and so on. And so we need to do this again in order to win Ukraine and therefore win the war. So I think it's interesting that this pressure is there within the in the elite circles in Russia, and I think you can see that the government is trying to balance. And the president himself, Putin, I think he said last year that he doesn't want to repeat the mistake of the Soviet Union, which was to spend too much on military expenditure. This is dangerous, he said, so he realizes this. But now we're at the point that they're already spending as much as the Soviet Union did in the 80s, at least.
Maybe one quick note on driving inflation. It's of course increasing the cost of the stuff that they're importing to the war machine. Some of the studies that we have looked at in the report suggest that they have increased quite massively the cost of imports by the sanctions that we have been imposed. We can also see that in terms of output, even the military industry and the tech industries that we thought would have a boost from what's going on actually have seen output declining in their sectors, and in particular making stuff more expensive also for them to import. So again, just tightening sanctions on imports, it's already increasing prices significantly, and we can do more in that. Quick note on Kazakhstan. I again think this is an example where we have to also be there and offer them something other than Russia. And let me just say good luck with that nuclear power station project. I don't want to be around when they're building that, to be honest. But again, I think we need to be there both with sticks and carrots and talking to them about what's the alternative to Russia. And I think we don't really have the resources or energy maybe to do that at a large enough scale. But again, that would be much needed, I think.
First, a few words on the Russian military economy, because I think that this is also a media term that is overshadowing what is going on. It's truly massive, but on the objective count, it's less than 10% of GDP, less than 10% of the workforce, less than 10% of the total capital fixed investment. So the absolute numbers are big, but the relative numbers to the rest of the Russian economy means that for the military economy, there is not enough liftoff to actually sustain everything else. It can produce big headlines, but basically this is it. We had a similar story in the Soviet times, when just military economy alone was insufficient to sustain the overall economic model. Are we good enough? That's a good question. And I have somewhat an unpleasant answer here. There was a very good study published in January by Brookings Institution in the United States, asking a simple question. Why the public perception in the US on American economy is so bad when the economy is doing historically great by all objective merits? Key answer is negative media bias. Because for journalists, it's not flashy, not good enough to praise the politicians. They want to criticize the politicians. They want to pick up the points where they can create a discussion, debate, and attack politicians to produce answers. This actually contributes to this notion that I tried to calculate this coverage in Western media. 78%, 80% of the headlines and substance is about sanctions not working. And all that we have been discussing today is basically on the sidelines. So again, that's a very touchy debate, but an example. The big article in The Economist about Russian economy, listing honestly all the difficulties, also the ones that we just mentioned, but at the end of the article mentioning, but with all of that, Putin will be able to sustain the current economic model for another 5 years, period. And end of the article. Why 5 years? Out of where this conclusion comes from, and so on. So there you go. We need a more nuanced debate. And finally, Diana, about the question of the Russian discussion. Obviously, it happens at a sort of a gunpoint. So this reminds me of a very Sovietic joke that we had. The shelves are empty in grocery stores, but the refrigerators are full. Refrigerators are full, but everybody is unhappy. Everybody is unhappy, but still voting for the Communist Party. And so we're coming back to this Soviet paradox. What is important is that we need to really take out some substantive comments, data, coming out of the officials, economists based in Russia. It's like when you produce oil, you pump it from the ground, there's a lot of water. So you got to separate the oil from the water. This is how you approach the Russian discussion. There's still a lot of fish to be caught in these muddy waters when they actually admit a lot of systemic fundamental problems and so on. On surface, Russians, ordinary people, elite, they would want to pretend that things are okay, but they're not. And there's plenty of material coming on from this, emitted on this frequency that we can catch and actually put in analysis like that even in Russia, they are really admitting that things are very far from okay.
So 3 or 4 questions more, and then we will wrap up. Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Katarina Engberg, Swedish Institute of European Policy Studies, and many thanks to the organizers and participants in this very important event. I have a question concerning labor shortage that I think has been mentioned by Russian economists as a potential constraint on the war economy. What is the actual situation? Are the salaries, influx of Central Asian workers solving the matter or attenuating the situation? So what is the state of matters?
Thank you. One question here and one here. First.
Good morning. My name is Jara Verkleij from the Netherlands Embassy. Also a lot of thanks from my side, of course. I have a question on the role of China and specifically the role of trade relations with China. As Torbjörn already mentioned, is that they use a much larger bloc than the Russian Federation. At the same time, I think it's a euphemism to say that trade relations between China and the EU are hitting rocky times with electric vehicles as the most recent example. So even though the EU might be a lot larger than other potential trade partners or other actual trade partners, the EU is also a more difficult partner. We have our reasons to do that. At the same time, within this context, I can imagine that for China it might also be actually beneficial to start looking for a more diversified set of trade partners, except for the EU and the US. So within this context, could you maybe reflect on this and maybe also give some advice to the EU concerning trade relations with China in light of Russia relations as well?
Thank you very much, Minister. Echoing colleagues' comments for the great event and the quality of the presentations. 2 questions, one in relation, if I may, to Mr. Milov. The question of the pay attention to what the central bank is saying. That's a very, very good insight, and thank you for sharing that to us, and a great pat on the back to the quality of people in central banks who are here, that they can hold the line of integrity on that. And on the question of the military expenditure, maybe Emil, can you comment? Putin, one of the characteristics of his leadership, if one can call it that, is the breaking of the nuclear taboo at moments when he's under pressure. Can you see in the 65% increase in military expenditure and beyond, and the drop this year, can you see behind that to see where the money is going into nuclear? Are they self-sufficient in nuclear? Could you comment on that, please? Thank you, Minister. Torbjörn, you can start.
Yeah, maybe labor shortage. We have some charts, and I was too slow to get to them in the presentation, but we can actually see unemployment rate is basically 0 or 2%. But we can also look at what we would call the reserves in the background, people that could potentially enter the labor force, and that's also at a low level. So, I mean, I really see that they have problems with labor. They also actually have problems in terms of how they think and treat their neighbors, so I'm not so sure that they will be able to fill the gaps with people from Central Asia. So I think this is a pretty massive challenge. I think quickly on China, yes, China is a problem. I also think we have to tell ourselves that we cannot trade with China at any cost either. And I think sort of we have to balance that with the narrative around how we deal with China and Russia. And I just think we have to unfortunately get out of, as an economist, I feel extremely sad to say, the liberal idea of free trade with everyone. There is an enormous security concern with trading with a lot of countries. China is one of them. But we also have to remember that we are still a much bigger market to China than Russia. So somehow we have to balance these things. And I think from a Chinese perspective, they are not ready to abandon trade with us. So we have to not feel that we are so weak, because we're not, and we have to remind China also about this.
And I will add something. I really think that India is a key factor. They are quite neutral, trying to be, but I think they will be an important, when we come to be diplomatic staff, they are important to talk to. Vladimir?
Oh, picking up on China, again, Russia is only 4% of Chinese foreign trade, and also Russia is a very small market. Generally, population is very poor, and it's an unsophisticated market. So if the EU blocks imports of Chinese EVs, there is no market for EVs in Russia. They cannot go there. Russia is not planning to actually develop the use of EVs. It's still combustion engines to the year 2100 and so on. So again, it's not so much of an alternative. There's really nothing to talk about it here. For if Chinese want the market, if they want to access to international financial systems, it's the West. Russia does not have neither market nor the financial system to offer. Interesting question about the labor shortage, because there are really not many direct indicators which can measure that. It's mostly done through surveys of specific industries and sectors, because they really publish or sometimes say the numbers about the labor shortages, whatever, agriculture, manufacturing industries and logistics and so on. The numbers are staggering. In terms of drivers or auto mechanics, you get numbers like well over 50% of vacancies systemically not filled. There are just no people. Sberbank recently said that they forecast 1 million people deficit of IT specialists by 2030, which is also not a new number. It's been circulating for quite a while. Like you had 250,000 deficit of labor in agriculture, about 160,000 deficit of workers in the military manufacturing industries, as per First Deputy Prime Minister Manturov, and so on. A central bank also does this quarterly monitoring of the enterprises survey. They survey 14 to 15,000 enterprises, where they do this indicator of the shortage of skilled labor, which is at the lowest point ever in 30 years of surveillance and so on. So that is really becoming the most pressing issue. And Russian authorities also launched a campaign to expel migrants for political reasons. They want to divert popular attention, because if you ask Russians what do they want for the government to do in the first place, in most surveys you will hear end the war, end the war, end the war. So they need to sort of divert the attention, and they launched a sort of anti-migrant campaign. On the background of this, there was a survey recently by Headhunter.ru and the Russian Union of Entrepreneurs. Over 50% of companies who want to hire migrant workers cannot do that because of shortage, because many people are leaving because of this repressive measures. So the deficit of skilled labor, which is also a pro-inflationary factor, very strong, is one of the key constraints why even the military economy cannot lift off because of all this situation with war, mobilization, mass immigration, and so on.
Thank you. Emil.
Yes, so on trade with China, to the degree we can try to interrupt the trade between China and Russia, I think we should really try to do that. And the US has done a lot with, on the payment side of trying to make that more difficult. But just another example where Sweden has a role is since much of the trade goes via rail between Russia and China, and they're building locomotives. They use ball bearings produced in Sweden, or they used to. So Russia is dependent on the Swedish component for locomotives, and this has actually become a constraining factor. Is producing new trains and getting the rail infrastructure to work. So that's just a small example of how our sanctions can help constraining the trade which Russia is so dependent on. The question on the nuclear, we can't see how Russia is dividing its military expenditure. We can see the sum, the total, but we don't know how they divide it. Up until 2 years ago, so when the invasion started, they were actually very transparent, and they published precise figures on how they financed all the different parts of their armed forces. And up until then, the strategic rocket forces, which are responsible for the nuclear weapons, they had I mean, their budget was quite constant, and was ring-fenced, and because this was prioritized as something important to keep. So my guess is that it has remained so, that they keep sufficient financing for them, but maybe that they haven't increased them because it's not like they're doing more now, but it's very important to keep that capability.
Thank you. So,